without further ado, Stephanie, do you want to take it over?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, our apologies for the technical glitches today. This is a first in over a year of doing this multiple times a day. So our apologies for that. So as we go through this roundtable, we're going to give everybody, what we want to hear is not so much your elevator pitch. Certainly tell us who you are, who you work for, kind of where you're from, what geography you cover, but tell us what you're seeing from kind of your aspect of the business. Just interesting observations, what, really what's going on or what's been different maybe since the pandemic started, and what is your forecast as everybody's starting to get their vaccines and things are starting to open up. Just interesting insights from your point of view. Braxton, if you wouldn't mind, let's start with you first, if you don't mind.
Sure, thank you very much. Glad to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to network and visit with everybody. I work for Bluestem Integrated. We are a full-service digital printing company in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We specialize in helping companies market their branding with on-bottle tags, neckers, and then in-store signage. We work with companies like Brand Muscle. We have the ability to kit, fulfill, and distribute to retailers throughout the United States. So I'm really here. I'm fairly new with Bluestem, so I can't really answer the last part of your question as far as what's been going on since last March, but it's been interesting for sure. And I'm looking forward to learning from the group and being a resource where we can.
Absolutely, great. It's great to have you here. Thank you so much. I should have mentioned everyone will receive the contact information of everyone here, and the individuals that have not yet joined us, but you will be getting everyone's contact information, and we encourage everyone to follow up. So Michael, why don't we take a moment? Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're up to and what you're seeing? I mean, you're right in the middle of this business. I'm the real estate person here, so tell us what you're seeing.
I will say that in the past 2 weeks, it feels like the wild, wild west of a gold rush related to Kentucky bourbon. We have been seeing an amazing demand for aged product. We have product that honestly, I'm shocked. And I don't know, and we don't know, we're not 100% sure why, but 2 weeks ago, we updated our bulk inventory with some 15-year-old totes at an exorbitantly high price that the seller wanted. And I thought, this is crazy. 4 totes, $92,000 each. So 275 gallons of 15-year-old. I had a buyer fill out the quote form like 2 hours later, which was like late Friday afternoon. I figured I'll call him back tomorrow. I got a call, like I have a buyer that wants all 4. And by the time we even got that, we contacted the seller who had listed it with us, and someone else had already contacted him and bought it. So it went away. So we then said, we'll find something else. We found a major producer who was willing to sell up to 300,000 gallons of 10-year-old whiskey, but it had to be in a minimum of tanker load. If all goes according to plan, they've signed a letter of intent, and they'll be closing on $11 million worth of 50 tankers of whiskey today. It's crazy. And so not those things are crazy. And I think it's a lot of institutional money that's coming into it, shifting to invest in this. Now, I'm saying that, but I also know that the buyers are distillers. And in the case of the large buy, they do intend to release a product, but I think they're also, it's also part of an investment strategy as well. So that's kind of a crazy thing that's been all consuming. And we've had more people calling for not that kind of volume, and there's just not availability of inventory. So it's kind of crazy. Here's another step data coming in.
That is, it's interesting from the real estate standpoint, and I don't mean to make the comparison, but what we're seeing is there's so much money sitting out there wanting to be deployed. It's driving costs up. And so I'm not surprised that you guys are seeing money being thrown. There's just so much of it out there wanting to go somewhere. So that's great news.
We have another call. We have someone, this is an investor, wanting 40,000 barrels of new fill a year. That's like 2 producers full time. So, I mean, I'm like, what? But they're an investor group. It's just so, yeah. So, I mean, look, I don't know what to tell you. And then in real life, there's things like brands that are still struggling for attention in a crowded market. And Tanya, by the way, who's joining us, she is the Joe Louis Bourbon brand ambassador, right? And,
Yeah, so
That's right.
Tanya, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing.
Yeah, so it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you all so much. It's definitely an honor, and I look forward to learning from you all as well. But on the ground, kind of what I am seeing is really the impact of the African-American female buyer. And I know, Steph, you talked about cigar boxes in the background, but we're kind of #1 in terms of consumers in the cigar market right now.
Wow.
And so if I walk into a cigar lounge, the guy is really not wanting to talk to the guy that's with me. He's wanting to talk to me right now because I'm the #1 consumer. So we're seeing the same sort of elevation in the bourbon and spirits industry as well. And for us, we're looking for the holistic experience. We're wanting not just the bourbon and the spirit in isolation. We're wanting to pair it with a cigar. We're wanting to go travel someplace. We're wanting to eat someplace nice to experience the bourbon. So we're not ones that like to sort of drink alone in sorrow. We like to be able to encompass it in a full, wholehearted experience there. And also, let's not forget about music as well. Another thing that I've noticed and experienced with Joe Louis Bourbon is that people love a really good story. People also love a purpose-driven brand. So, and I kind of say this to say that if you say, I've got this little great bourbon and people taste it, they're like, okay, great, but I've tasted like 50 other really great bourbons too. But if you can pair it with a story, if you can pair it with an individual, then people are willing to jump on and buy that bourbon just because of you and the story and the people it connects them with. And of course, Uncle Nearest is one of the biggest stories right now that's blowing up the bourbon industry. Why? It's because of that really great story. So we're hoping with Joe Louis Bourbon and the Making of Champions podcast that we're wanting to connect those stories with people and buyers and individuals as well. So that's what I've noticed too. The one thing I've noticed as a member of Black Bourbon Society, we're a group of individuals, about 22,000 strong right now. The organization started.
It was about 3,000 strong when I.
In 2017 was its inaugural year.
Are you all familiar with that influencer group? Started as a Facebook group and has become a paid membership group. There's 22,000 members now.
Yeah, 22,000 in the paid membership group. I mean, we're probably, I guess, around 2,000 strong maybe in that group. But what I've noticed just being in that group is that Samar Rivers is the CEO and the head of that group. We're wanting to make an impact, not only in our own collections, but in the bourbon industry by being involved and participating. But the one thing I've noticed in terms of behavior is that crazy strong buying block. We just had a barrel pick with Barrel Bourbon. We had a couple of picks there, one from her husband and one from Samara. I don't remember how many bottles she had. I want to say it might have been 900 bottles, but they all sold in 45 minutes with all of her members. And so if you want to move bourbon, you want to move it quickly, it's part of that social bond. Again, connecting people to stories, to experiences that moves the bourbon. So those are sort of a few things. I don't want to take up my 3 or 4 minutes, but again, happy to be here, happy to learn, and it's a pleasure. Look forward to future conversations.
Thank you,
with you guys.
Tanya. And you mentioned it, but there's this podcast every week that Tanya co-hosts with somebody else who's a boxing expert, and it's pretty compelling. So it's a great way to kind of show the story. All right, Steph, who's next?
I was going to say, Jimmy, have we been able to fix your audio? If so, we'd love to hear from you.
Testing? Good?
Testing, you're good.
Okay.
It's great to have you here.
Thank you. I had to be an A+ technician today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm Jimmy Spice Curry, and I'm actually deeply involved in multimedia production. And my colleagues and I are split off into two themes: progressive, liberal type, extreme left, off the charts. Even look, see my hand that far off.
That far off the charts.
And uh, Black Lives, Latino type endeavors. So the two groups I'm deeply involved in. And there are two endeavors that we're excited about. One is kind of a holistic, organic approach to liquor, because half of my friends are really, not hard drinkers, but very into, responsible driving, that kind of stuff. And then the other half, some of you know the term OGs, but it's called original gangsters, who are former street people, street, not regular people, but kind of high ranking, who are trying to do positive things now with their lives, and who come from various gangs looking to positively impact their community, but they are party animals. And so two different benches are occurring from both. And I represent kind of a creative, woke, socially conscious, but fun-loving group. So not the typical drinkers, but moderate, responsible, typically adults with families who are kind of into eco-friendly consciousness, BLM, saving the planet, those types of things. So it's not the young folks that are spring breakers, but kind of professionals. And
Well, I wanted to point out, Jimmy, that the reason that we connected is because of what Tanya was saying. It was that Joe Louis bourbon story, and you had connected with me, asking questions about it, and we talked it through in terms of, just the mission and the message and the positive thing. So, not to make this all touchy-feely, but that's kind of an interesting. You're illustrating here why the connections, the social connections, is a key part of it for any brand, especially a brand that can be connected to a social movement or a I don't want to say a cause, but I think that's really powerful.
yes, yeah, and in fact, the Joe Louis image and brand is not only known for knocking people out in the ring, but for knocking out causes that are deep to the heart of Mr. Lewis's, I'm sure, family. So they're the types of adventures I'm in, and I thank you for adding that. And it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I was going to say, just going back to what Tanya had said about creating that story. I mean, I've heard that so many times lately, whether you're trying to, attract investors, what's the story? What's the compelling reason, as opposed to just, here's the money, go do what you need to do. And it's that having that connection, those connections, and something that you can relate to as, obviously deeply important. It's great to have you here. And sorry again about your technical challenges that I'm sure we didn't help with. So thank you for your patience.
Thanks.
So Scott, why don't you tell us from your vantage point, kind of what you're seeing. It's great to have you here. Scott is with Whiting Turner, who's a major general contractor nationally. They are actually members of our Rural Professionals Network on the commercial real estate side. But we know that obviously getting your products made have to happen somewhere, and Scott and his partners not able to join him here today, but they are deeply entrenched in the actual physical spaces that the products are made. So Scott, tell us a little bit about your business, your practice, and what you guys are seeing.
So I am a senior project manager for Whiting Turner, and my group does a lot in food and beverage. I've worked in for way back in Seagram, at Seagram in Baltimore for many years, had relationships with them. We've built a couple distilleries, one in Kentucky, one here in Baltimore for Sagamore, and one in Kentucky for the Bullet Distillery for Diageo. And I spent 2 years in Kentucky, and like they said, say it went while in Rome. So I really got a
You
passion.
became a bourbon aficionado.
I did, and so it stuck with me, and I really love bourbon. I mix it up with some tequila and vodka every so often, but I mean that's why I'm here. That and we're always looking for opportunities to share and help. So that's why I'm
Great.
here.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you here. Have obviously you've built some of the larger, as I'm looking at my bullet behind me, but obviously having constructed larger facilities, are you all seeing, and I know you're a bigger contractor, but are you seeing some of the smaller shops? What are you seeing and hearing in that space as they're trying to, build up their space, their presence, and, it's not just the physical production piece, it's the, okay, come in and take the tour and all that kind of stuff. Have you all been involved in any of that, just as kind of localized outreach for smaller businesses?
We have. It seems like there's no real big projects going on now. I think Diageo might be the only one, but a lot of smaller distillers are popping up. The Sagamore was a neat little project. It's smaller, but they have a tour. They have adjoining restaurant, and we're seeing a lot of those kind of.
Yeah, kind of package it all together
Yeah.
to have the experience, right?
Yes.
No, that's great. That's great. It's great to have you here. I'm so glad you were able to join us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. So Jason, chasing the money, right? So tell us what you're seeing and doing to help these smaller businesses and the larger ones as they get growing.
Sure. So my name is Jason Sleeman. I lead the craft beverage lending group for United Community Bank. And so for us, we consider craft beverage distilleries, breweries, and wineries. So it's across the spectrum. And I think each one of them has different aspects as we look across the different pieces. So as we're looking at the distilling industry, we're starting to see a lot of small independent producers. So we've got a couple of startups that are coming through right now. And a lot of those, I just did a larger one that is going to start out, and most of them now are starting out with quick turn spirits. So they're starting out with a flavored vodka, and what we're seeing in the South a lot is things that are, peach based or, some kind of fruit base that makes it fruity and easy to drink. Or they'll start with a gin botanical where they can turn that over. And so we're doing that. We're seeing that a lot for both the cash flow benefits of it, but also the fact that they can start building a client base as they start to age some kind of spirits, right? So we're seeing those where they may come in a business plan and say, hey, we want to be the best bourbon producer or best whiskey producer that we can. But in the first couple of years, we're going to provide gin and vodka and some of these, maybe an unaged rum. We're going to do some of these kind of things. And so we're starting to see not a ton of expansions. We're seeing some expansions in space. So not necessarily going to another location, but they're increasing their tasting room. That's one of the things that we're seeing across all the industries. As we're coming out of COVID, everyone is focused on how do they get the consumer into their in drinking their product on site. So we're seeing a lot of requests for people either creating second tap rooms or they are expanding their existing tap room to try and be able to bring that consumer back to it. On the craft beer side, we're seeing a lot of expansion opportunities right now. There is a lot of flooding into the market for new startups. So, I probably will see 4 to 5 startup requests every week. And then I'm probably seeing 1 or 2 expansion requests every week. And so there's a lot of activity, in each side of the craft beverage industry where people are, trying to figure out how do they come out of this stronger than they went into it. And so a lot of people looking for second and third locations, a lot of people looking to add additional capacity. So they may be getting, equipment. So increasing their production capacity, increasing their cooperage, doing something like that. So we're seeing a lot of activity from this. The good news is that with all the stimulus that was put into the industry, they're not all super healthy, but most have held on and are doing pretty well, all things considering. So, they're trying to encourage their consumers to come out and consume on site, to consume in package, to consume at restaurants as those open. So, overall, the industry is turning into a good direction where we're seeing a lot of, good activity and people feeling pretty bullish about their brand and product, and trying to help expand that, whether that's going into another state or just expanding, their local markets.
Jason, I have a question. Are you familiar with Spirits USA?
I am not.
You're in the Georgia area, right?
I am. I'm in Atlanta.
So it's a startup in Cumming.
Okay.
And one of the CMO was on our last roundtable, and he'll be coming up. But what I think would be something that we'll just maybe make a note, Stephanie, for a connection between Jason and I, because they have patented technology, a purification technology. So their business model is that they are sourcing their juice.
Okay.
So they're buying already aged, so they're not actually distilling it, but they're running it through their system. And,
Okay.
And it, I would just be curious from a financial perspective, to try to put a value on it for them, because I don't know that they know what the value is, and I don't know how that would work. So we can talk about that offline, but I also know that they have a need for some capital. So
yeah, it's very interesting, and it's something that a lot of breweries, in licensing now in Georgia, and I'm sure you'll see it across other states. A lot of breweries are now getting both a brewing license and a distilling license, but they're contracting all their juice and they're really just blending it. And so that has been kind of an interesting concept, but it has added the revenue side of that blending that they're doing, and whether that's going into an RTD or going into some kind of bottle product or it's a cocktail that they're producing, has really, in some cases, almost doubled the value of these breweries because they can connect. And everyone's been talking about stories, right? So when you try and connect with the non-beer drinker in the group, it opens it up a lot to bringing that other person in, because they say, well, I don't drink IPAs or I don't drink whatever. But if you can say we've got this vodka cocktail that we can serve you, or we can serve you a pre-packaged old fashioned, it really does change the story of what these breweries can offer.
Yeah, I think one of the things that when I talked about earlier, that this seems like there's a run on Kentucky bourbon. I do think part of that is a post-COVID, a reliance on sourced rather than the capital that is required to lay down barrels and tie up money. And one of the reasons that I don't know if one of the things that we've developed, Victory, is the Bourbon Bond Fund. And that actually came out of the pain that I saw with a client distillery that had opened in, like many of the craft distilleries, opened in 2014, and laid down 75 barrels of whiskey to age for bourbon to age for 4 years before so they could sell it. And they, their first products at the door were gin and vodka and a flavored vodka, for those very reasons. But 4 years later, or 3.5 years later, by the time that inventory was about ready to mature, they were kind of running out of gas. They had blown through all of their own funding. They had raised whatever friends and family they could raise, and they really didn't have the budget to even market it properly. And so I looked at that from a business standpoint and said, for a startup to invest that kind of money up front, in production and laying down barrels, you might as well just go buy it at a higher price and turn it around, even if it's a lower margin, turn it around into money by getting it in the barrel right away. And we've been advocating for that. And so what we did is we first put together an offering that was a fixed price, buy it at the unaged price, and we'll it'll get made, it'll be held for you, and when you want it in 2 or 4 years, you can, you can take delivery of it. And I had distilleries saying, "This is great, but can you finance it?" And we created the bourbon bond as a way to allow accredited investors to finance it. They can't own it because it's illegal. You can't, unless you're a licensed buyer, you can't buy, sell, own, hold wholesale whiskey. And so we structured it that way. And we've done 4 funds. We're in our 5th right now to do it that way. But I know that there are a lot of investor groups, and I think I mentioned there's one that's seeking a huge volume. And I know that they're just buying it to sit on it, to turn it around and sell it because it appreciates so rapidly. But that said, I have had a conversation this morning with a distiller who said, if you've got someone who can finance this, I'll sign a commitment to buy it, in 2 years for, 30% more, which is lowballing the investor, but 30% more. But I think we're going to see more of that, which from a construction standpoint means I think there'll be maybe less of a need for building out stills and more of a need for potentially building out storage. Although, quite frankly, the storage, the big players in Kentucky, like Green River, they have capacity to handle 200,000 barrels of storage, so they can handle it for people. But I don't know, just because I think that whole move to sourcing, but I think from a financing standpoint, it may be about financing, product that quite frankly appreciates. I've got investors who are happy to write checks for it. I mean, why wouldn't a community bank that's looking to do it, finance this stuff either on behalf of a buyer or as an investment?
Yeah, it's an interesting opportunity because we do get those discussions, right? I mean, no matter what part of the industry you're in, they either want you to, finance the raw materials, right? And the quickest turn is the beer, and then the longest turn is the spirits or the wine. And so you got to figure out. I usually tell someone, if you're going to be a bourbon producer, you need to have enough working capital for the first 5 years. And that, your story kind of confirms what I always tell them is that's, if you can get past that point, then the barrels start paying off. But up until that point, it's all cash outflow and no cash inflow on those. And so you've got to have either deep pockets or you've got to have a way to generate enough cash flow to make sure that you're still around when those barrels actually come due.
Love it. And then I was looking at my old Fourth Ward distillery, and I remember going there in the early days, just like exactly what you said. Here's the vodka, here's the gin botanical, and come see us in 4 years when we have our bourbon ready to go. So same thing.
So truth be told, that was the example.
That's who I think it might be. I wasn't teeing that up, but I thought, wait a minute,
No,
I'm looking at it right
you
there.
wouldn't have known that. I wasn't going to disclose it, but that's who it was.
Yeah, but I mean, that story's, repeated, I'm sure, time and time again across every state. So, Jason, if you don't mind, obviously you're looking at business plans and underwriting, but going back to that story, I'm sure you get the story a lot of times for, folks that are looking to set up, whether it's craft beer, whether it's distilling, whatever. How much does the story impact your decisioning, understanding you're coming from a banking point of view, and I understand the financials are everything, but does that help you kind of cross the threshold of this is worth doing? So
I would say that it helps immensely, right? So as we look at the stories, not only am I looking at, what does your social media look like? What does the review? So I'll go out and Google that company and say, do they have bad press? Do they have, these things? But also, when you talk about the history, it's great when, especially on a startup, when you get someone coming in and saying, hey, I want to produce this. One of the bourbon groups that we did work for recently, the wife was an event planner. The husband had, some experience at the major, with some of the major spirit companies. And you looked at the two of them and you said, all right, you guys probably can figure this out. They had very much taken care of their personal life. So they had assets, they had taken care of their debt, they had done some things, they'd kind of run their life almost like a business, and they had built their resume to come and say, hey, we want to now own our own place. And by having these two things come together are really good. I think it's, the stories are great, but not having the story makes it even harder. So when someone comes to you and I say, great, what inspired you to do this? And they say, well, I just, I think it'd be cool. That is terrifying, right? And you're like, wait a minute, tell me about your experience. Tell me about what do you have together? And so I think sometimes it's the lack of story that is worse than having, like having a mediocre story, kind of thing. So I'd rather you have some story than no story, but having a really great story where it says, hey, we've come down 3 generations, like there's this brew pub. I know it's not on the spirit side, but, dad has owned, 80 restaurants in his life. The brother and sister came together. They started working in dad's restaurant. The son became the head brewer for the restaurant, and then they kind of broke off on their own. So the daughter owns all the hospitality, the son owns all the brewing, and they came together, and you're like, oh yeah, like the community wanted to pour money into it. And it made it really easy for the bank to be able to give them money because, they raised 30 or 40% of the project just because community, like they're like, well, we can't say no to all this money being thrown at us. And that was their story. So having the story is huge because it garners a lot of support. And that story also tells me that people are going to buy your product. And that's a huge part of
that you're invested to wake up every single morning and drive for the result, right?
Yes.
Well, it's about the passion,
totally.
the perseverance, and the perspiration that the founders are bringing to the opportunity too. I mean, they got to wake up every day, ready to, seize the day and not just look at it as some passive. It's going to grow itself.
Yeah, to use the word cool, totally get that. Absolutely. So, Michael, what other thoughts do you have for the group? Questions that you want to lob out there?
Well, I would, I'm going to say that I think we're in an interesting transitional moment here because we're just emerging from a time when the on-premise business was basically non-existent. It was literally year over year down 40%. That's, and it probably is more than that, but that's what the U.S. Distilled Spirits Council happened. At the same time, overall category spirits sold were up 18% because it was all coming from retail. People were consuming more. So I think what's interesting is that when everything opens back up, I'm not sure it's all going to be back to normal, but I think there's going to be a new normal. And I think that new normal is this greater appreciation for cocktails and for the social experience. But at the same time, there's a greater, I think the retail juggernaut has continued to go because people have learned how to make drinks themselves. They have become more familiar with that whole thing. And quite frankly, I think a lot of the laws that have changed, that are being changed in terms of allowing, restaurants to sell cocktails to go. Also, the smaller, even the smaller producers used to be just the big guys are getting into, pre-made canned cocktails, bottled cocktails, and those have higher margins. So I think it's interesting. There's all these stories about, are we about to have a sober consciousness movement, where everyone's been drinking every day, and now they're going to swear off drinking. Well, I don't think it works that way. So I think from a consumer demand standpoint, so I'm just saying, I think from a consumer demand standpoint, the large players are going to benefit. They are benefiting immediately. One thing, I think we talked about this on the last roundtable. I think it was Derek. I forget Derek's last name. Just from what they were seeing in terms of on a nationwide look, that for the first 3 or 4 months of March, April, May, June of the pandemic, it was the people were not shopping. They were going to the liquor store, grab and go. What's familiar? Grab that bottle of Makers and get to the checkout with their mask as fat. They're not browsing. And then people started feeling a little bit more comfortable over the summer, although it was false security, but a little more comfortable over the summer, but they were also bored. And so then all of a sudden there started to be more sampling and more sales of higher end premium or more, craft, if you want to call it that. But at the end of the day, the smaller producers were hurt the most because they weren't big enough to be dominant and get that end cap shelf space because people could grab something and go. So it'll be interesting to see now. There's a crisis in this for the smaller producers, and many of them are still struggling to survive. We talked about the growth of the small producers. So in 2014, there were 500, almost 600 licensed spirits producers in the United States. Now, recognizing that 90% of 95% of all spirits are produced by 5 companies, and the other percent. So, but that had been declining. So that went down to about 85, 86, 7% of the market, and that there was an increasing share of the smaller producers, because in 2019, in 2019 there were 2,500 licensed spirits producers. And so that represents an exponential growth in the smaller players. It's estimated that 40% of them either have not or will not survive the year. But even so, when all those growth numbers, there were still 400 distilleries a year that were closing, because it's a tough business to get going and to get started, to get that tipping point. So I think what we'll see here is A, there's going to be some consolidation. B, there's going to be there'll be fewer craft, or craft is really a wrong term. Fewer local producers who are doing from grain to glass, or doing the whole thing themselves. And I think that's why I'm personally very bullish on the contract sourcing market, because the reliance on sourced juice, both from an investment standpoint and a supply chain standpoint, makes so much sense. But I think that we're still, one other little fact that I love to share is that in the United States, whiskey as a category, American whiskey, peaked in 1970. It was, in the 60s, Mad Men era, it was all whiskey. It was all old fashions and Manhattans, and it was more blends than bourbon. Bourbon has since eclipsed, but then starting in 1970, vodka overtook American whiskeys and has continues to be the dominant category, but it has stalled over the past 5 years or 6 years, and it's just hanging on to that leadership category, where the American whiskey category has grown. But so last year there were 25 million cases of American whiskey sold in the United States. In 1970, there were 36 million cases. So we still haven't returned to that level, and there's a bigger market now. It's in higher demand. So I think the next few years, pulling out of this pandemic, where people feel a little bit more at ease in spending and in celebrating and going out, are going to be really interesting to watch. And hopefully, out of the ashes of some of these smaller brands and smaller producers, they'll continue to be a demand for the authentic and not the mass market.
Exactly.
Appreciation, I should say.
Here's hoping, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, well, I think, does anyone have anything they want to ask the others? We have this is kind of a limited group. We probably need to make sure that we extend invitations to all of you to join us on our next roundtable, along with all the other people who are registered and got blocked by the registration barrier, which we'll figure out. But I do want to remind anybody, if they do want to sample the mastermind group next Thursday with Greg, please let Stephanie know. Send an email, reply to her email, or send an email to attend@realpros realprofessionalsnetwork.com or attend@drinkprosnet.com. Anyone have any questions, any feedback?
Well, some quick feedback regarding the new normal that some of our colleagues may think is the future. I think for all brands, whether it's a celebrity, sports team, or drink, people are looking at the brand for something. And many of the things that some of my associates and I are looking to be involved in, the new normal for us is looking at the bubonic plague and World War I and World War II, and humanity not getting stuck on that type of new normal. So we have an outlook that this whole pandemic we're going to overcome. And so in projects that I work on, entertainment or other, that's the vision. Because I have 4 kids, I don't want to walk around in masks and, hey, Dad. So whether I'm delusional or not, that's kind of what most of our folks, are looking at when we work on projects. But I do understand your perspective that, it's a possibility that this will be the new normal, but it won't be normal. So
No, I mean, it's not going to ever be 100% normal. Look, I mean, I think of this every day that I walk out and I'm wearing a mask, walking on the sidewalk. I mean, who would have thought that, 14 months ago?
Yeah.
Would have been like, what? I saw that on the news from in Beijing because the pollution.
Yeah.
That was
Michael,
I mean, my son was living in Shanghai, and so I was used to, he'd do a video call while he's walking home from work, and he'd be wearing a mask, and it was pollution. He'd say, "Oh, today it's 800 ppm day. I gotta wear the mask." Anyway, sorry.
no, I was saying that you and Steph made me think, now there's this new joke down in Atlanta that probably 30% of New York has moved down here. And so I think part of the new normal is going to be, because we've, so many of us have been stuck inside for so long, that while there is going to be that need to go out and experience and enjoy spirits and bourbon, that there is also going to be this need to make sure that home is sort of right in case something happens. And so whoever can figure out how to make these nice little at-home bars without some of us having to go through too many hoops, because I myself can't build it, and I don't want to buy a cheap little IKEA shelf, but I would like something looking nice that's sort of back behind you on your screensaver. Whoever can get in on that market is going to make a ton of money, because there are some of us and lots of us in Black Bourbon Society that want our home bars to be just as nice as the outdoor experience. And so think about that sort of just in case scenario, because it'll take us probably the next 5 or 10 years to be able to step out there and play around, but want to have the security of home too.
Great point.
Well, I will, to that point, and you've been to my house, but you may not have noticed this. There's a little den off the kitchen before the dining room that really was just a sitting room. And during COVID, it got turned into what we now call the supper club. And it's all like cocktail, cheeky stuff, and like the little lamp on the cocktail table that looks like you're sitting at a supper club. And you know what? We go and we would go start our date nights and then meet you in the supper club, and but before that it was just like 2 chairs in front of a fireplace.
Yeah. I mean, I know in our household we went from probably 10 bottles to almost 117 bottles on hand now, just during the course of 1 year.
Oh, that's how many
So
I put in recycling last week.
Yeah, that's many of us right now. So whoever can figure that out, they're going to be golden.
Yeah. Well, I was speaking with someone, actually it was one on the pilot episode that we did for this. I'm trying to think of his name. We used a corporate executive chef for a large company that did event-based catering and corporate catering. And they had made an early pandemic pivot where he said he was spending time developing cocktail mixes, and they were sending cocktail kits. So it was, it could be the shaker, it could be the tools, it could be the garnishes, it could be the thing, everything but the booze, so that people would go and buy the spirit and put it in there. And quite frankly, that's, I think, still a very viable position to take, especially if the recipe has to include a certain brand and then make the customers go and buy it. But anyway, that's another marketing thing. We'll talk more marketing on the marketing roundtable. So I'm going to recap so everyone knows what I'm talking about here. So just a reminder that we have this will recap this, and it'll be on Drinks Tank, which you can see on Facebook and LinkedIn at Victory Spirits Development, or on Boom Zoom Net on YouTube. The network roundtables will continue first Fridays every month. Third Wednesday starting in May, Brand Acceleration in Digital World Mastermind Group. Third Fridays beginning in May, American Whiskey Markets and Futures with Chuck Morton. Next Thursday, we kick off with Greg Mefford, Mastermind Group International Markets. And hopefully we will see you guys there. All right. Stephanie, any final words?
I was going to say, my apologies, my internet just flashed a moment. No, it was great to hear from everyone. Great to connect with all of you. Again, our apologies for the technical glitches that we've had, but we hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. We'll be following up with everyone's contact information, the recording of the session, and we'll recap the dates of our upcoming mastermind groups, and we encourage you to attend any of those that you're interested in. But nice to meet all of you. Thank you, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe, everyone.
Take care.